I grew up in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Have any of you ever heard of Zippo lighters? They're from here. A thick forest surrounds the town, along with most of the neighborhoods. My family lives sort of on the outskirts of Bradford. Of course, much like the town itself, our house was also surrounded by forest. If you took in the scene from our back porch, you would see nothing but sprawling trees for miles. I tell you this so you can gain a sense of isolation. Out at my house, you could scream at the top of your lungs, and no one would come to help you. This happened back in the summer of 1996. I was 11 years old at the time. I had a childhood friend named Marty, who was the same age. Our fathers worked together and knew each other well. He would come over almost every Friday to hang out. Marty and I found ourselves hiking through the trees as we often did. However, we were feeling a bit daring and went further into the forest than we usually did. There was this barrier of trees that we would never go past, simply because I didn't know the area beyond that point. We continued past the barrier into uncharted territory. We eventually came upon a clearing. In the middle of this clearing was an old, disheveled-looking tent. Being the curious young men we were, we of course had to see inside. As we approached, I could feel the temperature around me drop. I'm no stranger to the cold, but this was in the middle of summer. Even at my age, I could sense that there was something truly sinister inside this tent. A part of me was screaming to hightail it out of there, but my own curiosity pushed me forward. We both stopped just outside the tent, and suddenly, we were both too frightened to move any further. We were both frozen in place, staring at the open flap of the tent as it swayed from side to side. The sky seemed to grow even darker since we discovered this tent, and though we were standing directly in front of it, we could not see inside. What happened next is the reason that I still struggle with alcoholism. A dark hand slowly emerged from the tent's opening. It reached out to us, with long black nails protruding out from its fingertips. I'm not ashamed to admit that I pissed myself out of fear. The hand slowly turned and made a beckoning gesture with its index finger, and that's when Marty and I heard a deep, bellowing laughter from inside the tent. I don't remember much about what happened after that. I just remember me and Marty running for our lives, tearing through the woods and back to my house. I do have a vague memory of me briefly looking behind me as I ran to see a tall, dark, and human figure standing just outside the tent. Upon returning, Marty immediately called his mom to come pick him up. My mother asked us what was wrong, and we both explained to her that we saw some kind of creature in the forest. My mother ultimately dismissed our claims, but led us in a prayer while we waited for Marty's mom to arrive. Marty never came back after that, and we sort of drifted apart. Sadly, Marty began hanging out with the wrong crowd and began doing hardcore drugs when he was around 14. He ended up hanging himself in his bedroom when he was 17. As for myself, I suffered from severe night terrors that tormented me for years after that day in the woods. I'm not going to get into what I experienced in my nightmares, but I will say that I became an alcoholic as a result. After moving far away and attending numerous AA meetings, I'm glad to say that I've turned my life around, and I even have a family of my own. I still visit Bradford every now and again to check in on my aging parents. Whenever I'm there, I always set flowers on Marty's grave. I'm still convinced that what we saw that day in the woods contributed to his death. Now that I have some perspective, I think what Marty and I encountered was a demonic presence. It followed us home and proceeded to turn both of our lives upside down. There were rumors of people worshiping Satan out there in those woods around the mid to late 90s. Perhaps they awakened something, and Marty and I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. This is going to be a long story, but to understand how all this started, I have to start from the beginning. I'm a happily married 28-year-old female. I have been with my husband since August of 2012. The summer before I met him, I was dabbling into some pretty dark stuff. I was studying witchcraft, reading tarot cards, and playing with Ouija boards. I'm no longer into that stuff, and I became a Christian. However, the consequences of my actions would later come back to haunt me. Being 19 at the time, I was in over my head. But as they say, curiosity killed the cat. I ended up performing an incantation. I'm not going to go into detail about what the spell was for personal reasons, but let's just say it worked. But like everything that deals with magic, there's always a cost. The result started perfectly, but ended up backfiring severely. I was so upset that I planned on trying it again. That's when the paranormal disturbances began. They started off very minor and cliché. Knocks on the walls, footsteps in the middle of the night, and night terrors. It happened so frequently that I managed to ignore it. Fast forward about 2 years. I was now with my husband at this time, but we weren't married yet. We fell on hard times financially, and for those reasons, we started living at my parents' house, the place where I performed all my witchcraft. Things started to take a turn for the worst, starting with the nightmares. It was absolutely terrifying and way too realistic. I dreamt that I was in my bedroom. I saw a strange light coming through my vanity mirror. I found myself sitting on my bedroom floor with my legs crossed, and my boyfriend was sitting on the edge of the bed. Neither of us spoke a word. We sat there in the same positions. Then suddenly my boyfriend asked me, "What's wrong with your face?" I got up from the floor and looked into the mirror. The light that was coming from the corner of the mirror made it hard to see at first, but when my eyes adjusted, I noticed my face starting to change. My normal face melted away and slowly turned demonic. That's when I lost control of my body. Before I knew it, I turned around and looked at my boyfriend and started laughing. It was a dark, deep, bone-chilling laugh. Then I began to levitate, pointing and laughing at my boyfriend, who sat there petrified. That's when I woke up, covered in sweat. I look over to my clock to see that it was 3:30 a.m. The next disturbance occurred not long after that. I would say about 6 months later. My boyfriend and I finally got on our feet. We bought a car and headed to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we stayed with one of our friends. We both ended up getting great jobs. Cody, my boyfriend, was hired as a collision technician, and I got a job as a barista at Starbucks. While we were working and saving money, our schedules were completely different. Our roommate Kevin worked at a nursing home and would sometimes work at night and sleep in all day, or vice versa. Cody worked consistently from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. I typically worked the same hours, but my days off didn't coincide with anyone else's. I tried getting as many weekends off as I could, but it wasn't always possible. The Starbucks I worked at was a little short-staffed, so I did a lot of overtime. One time, on a Thursday, I had the day off and I was home alone. My boyfriend and my roommate were both at work. I was the only female, living with 2 guys, so needless to say, I had a lot of cleaning to do. So I spent most of my day tidying up. It wasn't until around 1 p.m. that I finished. Since there wasn't much else to do, I was going to take a nap. I don't recall how long I was asleep, but as I laid there, I heard the front door of our apartment open, followed by footsteps. It sounded like Cody was home. I always kept the apartment door locked. Cody and Kevin were the only other ones with the keys. I kept listening as the footsteps approached the bedroom. I tried to get up to greet him, but I found myself unable to move or even open my eyes. I heard the bedroom door open and felt something sit at the edge of the bed. I then suddenly felt something grabbing my throat. The pressure made it difficult to breathe, and I was freaking out, completely paralyzed, unable to scream or speak. I began praying in my head, and slowly the entity loosened its grip, and I was finally able to wake up. I still felt pressure on my throat. I looked over to my clock to see that it was only 2:40 p.m. I was only asleep for about an hour and a half, and Cody didn't get home until almost 5. After I collected myself, I realized what happened to me wasn't a dream, and I didn't want to be home alone anymore. I didn't have the car, so I couldn't leave. I immediately called Cody at work, in tears, begging him to come home early. He said he would try his best, but he was in the middle of a big job and couldn't just walk away. So I had to sit in our apartment, alone, and just wait. I sat in the kitchen by the door until he called back and said that he was on his way. That was around 4 p.m. When he got home, I was still very upset, and I told him what happened. He did his best to comfort me. He believed me, which was a relief. He had experienced a few paranormal events himself when he was a kid. He said if it ever happened again when I was by myself, that I should pray. So from that point on, that's how I chose to deal with this. I was a Christian after all. Prayer helped at first, but soon, it wasn't enough. By this time, it was early 2017. Cody and I were married, and I found out that I was pregnant with our son. It was early into my pregnancy, the first trimester, so I slept a lot. I didn't really have morning sickness much, but I did get these awful headaches at night. Since I was pregnant, I wasn't allowed to take any over-the-counter medication to address it. So it was one of those nights where I felt a headache coming on. So I decided to go to bed. This was around 9 p.m. My husband was lying next to me, reading news articles on his phone. Not long after I fell asleep, I had a nightmare about a horned shadow figure attacking me, and I didn't have the strength to fight it off. It told me,
"We want the child. He belongs to us."
I fought back as best I could, and I began to pray out loud. When I would speak in my dream, I also spoke in my sleep, and my husband heard it. He told me that I wasn't speaking English. It didn't sound like it was my voice either. In fact, he said it sounded like several demonic voices speaking at once. I woke myself up, and the first thing I saw was Cody's terrified face. I tried my best to explain, but my emotions were all over the place. When I finally calmed down, I told him that even though what we heard come out of my mouth was utterly terrifying, what the figure in my dreams said was far worse, because it involved our unborn child. After that experience, I was extremely paranoid throughout my entire pregnancy. I prayed all the time and hoped it would be enough to repel the demonic forces. Nothing else happened until the night I went into labor. The doctors told me that my due date was October 11th, but it turned out to be much later. My son ended up being born on October 30th, 3 a.m. Not even kidding. He was healthy, and the delivery went well, but his birth date has always been troubling to me, especially after that dream. When my son turned 2, we left Pittsburgh and moved in with my parents in Ohio just before the pandemic. When COVID-19 hit, we both ended up losing our jobs and applied for temporary unemployment. We wanted to get the money together for our own apartment in the next town over. We moved in September of 2020, and we have been here ever since. When we got here, my son started hearing things from my bedroom closet. He sleeps with us, and he started talking about something called the noise. He said he saw the noise poking his head out from the closet one night. He said that the noise lived in the closet and had a weird head. He was only 3 at the time, so he could only be so descriptive. Now fast forward to the summer of 2021. One night I was up late, scrolling through YouTube videos. I'm subscribed to almost every creepypasta and horror channel there is on YouTube. My favorites being Uncle Unit, of course, Darkness Prevails, Undead Storyteller, Slumber Reads, and Mr. Creeps. Anyways, as I was listening, my son was on my lap, and I stumbled across a video by Mr. Creeps with a thumbnail photo being that of a goat-like demon head, and my son immediately pointed at my phone and said, "Look, Mommy, it's the noise." My heart sank into my stomach, and I immediately started asking him questions. I made him tell me what the noise looked like, and also asked him, "Does it talk to you? If so, what does it say?" My son replied that the noise only talked to him in his bad dreams, but he could never tell what he was saying. I found this alarming to say the least. The next day I called my uncle, who is a pastor at a local church. I asked him to come over and bless our home. After telling him everything that led up to my son seeing the entity, he said that he would come, but since he worked as a truck driver on the side, he would have to stop by on his next day off, which wouldn't be for another 8 days. As I anxiously waited, life remained the same. My son didn't really mention anything about the noise much at all, and we were doing a lot of praying. About 4 or 5 days after I called my uncle, all 3 of us were upstairs in our spare bedroom that we turned into a video game lounge. We called it the Chill Cave. Me and Cody were playing Left 4 Dead 2 on the mini couch, and our son was playing on the floor with his Minecraft toys. We were so focused on the game that we didn't realize that our son had gotten up and left the room. I thought maybe that he was going to go to the bathroom, since we trained him early. But the next thing we knew, we heard a tumbling sound. My heart was racing so fast, because I knew the moment it happened that my son had fallen down the stairs. My husband and I didn't think twice, and we ran out of the room. My son was at the bottom of the landing crying hysterically. We made sure he was okay and checked him out. By some miracle, he only had a couple of bruises on his elbow and knee. He did not hit his head or break any bones, thank God. He was okay, just more or less stunned. When we finally calmed him down and put ice on his elbow and knee, we sat him down and asked him what happened, wondering if he had tripped on something or slipped on the rug. To my surprise, he said, "It was the noise, hiding in the bathroom. I tried to run away and hide from him, and he pushed me." I was so full of fear and anger after hearing this. I had officially had enough of this shit. So I did some research on how to bless our home properly and went all out with religious symbols and imagery. We walked around our home as a family, praying and asking Jesus Christ to remove the dark spirit from our home. We haven't had anything else happen since that day. If anything else does occur, I'll be sure to keep you updated. Until then, any advice or prayers will be greatly appreciated so that this demonic force never returns. I'm in my late 60s, and I grew up in the Bronx. The Bronx isn't exactly known for supernatural activity, but I can tell you from living there for many years, a lot of strange things happen in New York, aside from the drug abuse and the crime that takes place in the back alleys. Let's go back in time to 1962. It was my 7th birthday. My grandmother got me this vintage Mattel Jack-in-the-Box. This was back when these kinds of toys were more commonplace. From the moment I opened the gift, I immediately got a bad feeling. Jack-in-the-Boxes are naturally creepy to some people, and I was never a fan of them, even as a kid. But I loved it when my grandmother came up from Brooklyn to visit us, and if I even hinted that I didn't like the toy she got me, my mother would have made sure I didn't sit down for a week. I don't know where my grandmother got this thing, but if I had to guess, she probably got it from one of the several pawn shops in the area. I think this is significant to point out, because this means that the toy was not bought brand new, and had a previous owner. After my birthday celebration was over, me and my dad put all of my presents in my room. I specifically remember setting the Jack-in-the-Box down in my toy chest. My family had this tradition where we would always gather in the living room and listen to some radio shows before going to bed. When 8 o'clock rolled around, I was told to brush my teeth and go to bed. When I was done in the washroom and went into my bedroom to turn in, I instantly noticed that the jack-in-the-box was now resting at the foot of my bed. I was confused because I remembered putting it away in my toy chest, but I figured that one of my parents might have been messing with me, so I placed the toy under my bed and tucked myself in. I ended up having these violent, horrifying nightmares over the next following weeks. I remembered seeing unspeakable things in my dreams. Everything is obscure to me now from the passing of time and my mind trying to block out certain things, but I'm confident that what I saw in my dreams was of a sexual nature. I would wake up screaming many times, to the point where my mother ended up taking me to the doctors to find out what was wrong. The doctors performed several tests on me and concluded that I was perfectly healthy and recommended that I be taken to a child psychologist. The night that I got back from the doctors was when this whole situation would reach its climax and conclusion. Maybe it's obvious to everyone listening to this what was going on, but at the time, I didn't really have a clue. I woke up that night, not from a nightmare, but from that feeling you get when someone is watching you. I had a nightlight plugged in next to my bed. In the dim light, I saw the jack-in-the-box my grandmother had gotten for me resting at the foot of my bed. That's when the unthinkable happened. It was like a scene straight out of a horror film. The crank on the side of the box slowly began to turn, and a distorted, slowed-down version of the melody began to play. When the tune finished, the clown inside the box popped out. Even though I saw it coming, it still made me jump. However, there was something else that I noticed that instantly made me forget all about the creepy little plastic clown. Recalling this now still makes my insides crawl. Looming just behind the toy box was a tall black figure. The only thing I could tell you about this shadowy presence is that it had these long horns on top of its head. I was raised Catholic, but I was never told at that point in my life about the fallen angel Lucifer, or his foot soldiers, commonly referred to as demons. My fragile little mind could not comprehend what I was witnessing, but I remembered my teachings about God's love and the power of prayer. So I closed my eyes and began to pray aloud. Shortly after I began my prayer, I heard a loud shrieking, as if I was inflicting pain to whatever was in my room. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw that the figure was gone. The box that was still resting at the foot of my bed was now closed. We lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. Outside of my room was one of those stereotypical dark alleys New York City is known for. I opened up my bedroom window and hurled the box out. As soon as I threw it, I was expecting to hear it crash on the concrete below, but instead, I heard what can only be described as giant wings flapping. I didn't see anything, but I felt a gust of cold air hit me, and I quickly shut my window and ran back under the covers. I'm sharing my story to inform everyone that there are dark forces out there beyond our comprehension. You'll be surprised to hear that I'm no longer a part of any organized religion. I'm still a very spiritual person, and I do believe in a higher power. If you're confused by this, I'll try to break this down for you in the simplest of terms. Dark entities, like the one I encountered so many years ago, are comprised of energy, and they react to other energies in different ways. If you show fear in the face of adversary, they will feed off that fear and become stronger. If you show bravery and perform an act like prayer as a means to combat the presence, that is what ultimately drives them out. I believe wholeheartedly that you don't have to belong to a church or a certain religion to deal with an intruding presence. It was this event that inspired me to become both a counselor and a paranormal investigator. I have used my experiences with the paranormal to help many families across America. So if you ever encounter one of these dark spirits in your home, remember my words. Do not show fear. Be brave. and make it clear that they are not welcomed. My name is Roberto Lopez. I grew up in Mexico City and relocated to Texas in 1998, where I got a job remodeling houses. The company I worked for was located in Texarkana, which is a city located between the Texas and Arkansas border. We would do jobs mostly on the Texas side, but we would often get contracts in the neighboring states of Louisiana and Oklahoma as well. Our workforce was comprised of mostly immigrants, including myself. However, I was the only one in my crew who could speak both English and Spanish. I quickly rose to a supervisor position because of this, and after a while, the owner of the company allowed me to go out and do jobs on my own. Ever since I was a child, I have been able to see things that most people can't. I've never invested much into the notion of the paranormal. Being from Mexico, my family were all devout Catholics and extremely superstitious. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I learned at a very young age to keep my mouth shut. Anyway, I got a call from my boss one early Saturday morning, and he told me that he needed me to head to a property in Oklahoma the next day. The owner had just bought the land and wanted an estimate on some repairs, so I made the 4-hour drive the very next day and pulled up to the address. As soon as I saw the place, it gave me the chills. Whenever someone says haunted house, you may picture an old 2-story home with shattered windows, cracked walls, and a roof that looks like it could collapse at any moment. A contractor's worst nightmare. This house checked all of those boxes. There was a rusted dual swing entry gate with one side lying on the ground and the other barely holding on to its hinges. I parked my truck outside the gate, grabbed my flashlight and clipboard, and headed toward the old house. I was told that the owner had left the place unlocked for me, and I was free to walk around and take notes. The front door opened with a creak, loud enough to wake the dead. The house was in complete disarray. There were several holes in the floor and ceiling. Mold covered nearly every inch of the walls, and weeds were growing in the fucking living room. It also had that unpleasant smell of mildew from all the water damage. There was no telling how long this place had been abandoned for. In my honest opinion, the owner was better off bulldozing it and building a new one. I remembered that the only thing I wrote down was, "Everything is broken." Nevertheless, I figured I would look around anyway and give my boss all the details. There was a staircase that led to the second floor. On the wall to the left of the stairs, someone had wrote a message in black paint. "It lives upstairs." Whoever left this message looked like they did it in quite a hurry, and it certainly didn't help the creeped out feeling in my gut. As I mentioned before, I've always been sensitive to the supernatural, but unlike most people with this ability, I don't really make a big deal out of it. Do I see ghosts sometimes? Sure. When I was a kid, they really freaked me out, but after a while, I got used to it. Upon seeing the painted message and making my way up the stairs, I felt something that I had never felt before. When I got to the top of the stairs, it felt like I was in imminent danger. Something truly evil lived in this house. At the top of the stairs was a hallway. At the far end was a corridor with 2 doors on either side. I watched in absolute horror as the door on the right slowly opened and a dark figure emerged. When you encounter something unnatural and inhuman, its appearance is actually amusing at first. That's just your mind coping with something that should never be seen walking this earth. I remember letting out a chuckle before pure terror took over. The shape that stood in the hallway was pitch black with a surmounting pair of horns. Its upper half resembled that of a bodybuilder. However, there was something strange about its legs. It almost seemed like they were backward at first, but after a moment, I realized where its feet should be. were a pair of hooves. The thing uttered an ear-piercing shriek. Causing me to topple backward down the steps. Once I landed at the bottom, I immediately scrambled to my feet, not caring about the pain, and I hauled ass back to my truck. After I got in and turned on the engine, I remembered seeing a dark shadow looking down at me from one of the upstairs windows. I drove back to my company's headquarters and informed my boss that the place was unsalvageable and the owner was better off tearing it down, which was the truth. But I left out the part about the demonic encounter on the second level. To make a long story short, I needed this job, and my boss could be a real jackass sometimes, and I thought it was best to keep this incident to myself. Since that day, I have never encountered anything like that before, and I hope I never do again. Take my story for what it's worth. If you're skeptical, I'll tell you this. Until you experience it yourself, you'll have a hard time believing any of this. But I'm telling you, there are dark forces in this world, just waiting to be awakened. Back in February of 2001, my friend Jake invited me on a weekend trip to a remote cabin his uncle owned in northern Saskatchewan, and I agreed to join him. So we drove the long 6 hours from my house to get there. Let me give you a brief layout of the grounds before we continue. It was a small ranch-style cabin with a kitchen, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a living room. There was no electricity or running water, and it was surrounded by forest on all sides. The only way in or out was down a long, unpaved driveway. We arrived around dusk. The next day, Jake and I walked around the forest to search for some firewood. About an hour into the walk, Jake spotted an old abandoned house in the distance. It was nestled among a group of trees. This was rather strange as we were in the middle of nowhere in northern Saskatchewan, and civilization was miles away. Jake wanted to check out the house, and although I was hesitant to tag along, I reluctantly accompanied him. We entered through a boarded-up window. Once inside, we were greeted by a musty smell. After roaming around for a bit, I noticed a door that led into the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I opened the door and slowly made my way down the steps. Once I reached the bottom, I froze. There were dimly lit candles in a circular pattern, as if someone had been performing some kind of ritual. I pointed my flashlight across the basement floor to see if there was anyone hiding, but no one was there. After doing some exploring, I discovered that there was an empty alcove behind the stairs. As I made my way back to the steps, I saw something out of the corner of my eye under the stairs, which had been clear just moments before. There was a black figure staring directly at me. I guess it had to have been at least 8 feet tall. Once I saw its eyes, I knew that I was in the presence of something inhuman. A pair of glowing red eyes stared back at me, full of hatred and malice. I then heard a low, repulsive growling. The kind of sound that makes you feel like you're about to be torn apart by a vicious animal. Without hesitation, I bolted up the stairs. Jake was still exploring the empty living room when I startled him. "We need to get the fuck out of here, now!" We left the same way we entered. Our story does not end there. When we finally returned to the cabin, I told Jake about what I saw, and to my surprise, he believed me. I didn't see anything myself, but the moment we entered that place, I felt that something evil lived there. I was feeling a bit creeped out myself before you came running up from the basement. We decided to put the whole thing behind us and try to get some rest. I suddenly woke up and checked my watch. The time was 2:17 a.m. Things were dark and quiet, but I felt that something was amiss. After a while, I heard subtle footsteps outside the bedroom door. That's when Jake woke up as well. What's going on? Shh. Listen. The footsteps became louder. I got up from my bed and made my way over to the bedroom door. I then cracked it to see what was outside. Chills were sent through my body. There was an intruder in the cabin, but it was not human. It was that same creature I saw in the basement of that abandoned house. The moonlight did not provide adequate illumination, but I saw the disturbing form twisting its head until its red eyes were looking back at the bedroom door. Or should I say, me. I slammed the door shut, locking it. In a panic, we both fled the cabin through the bedroom window, leaving all of our belongings behind. As we ran towards Jake's truck, we heard a very loud, ear-piercing scream. Jake frantically started the truck and floored it out of there. We remained silent the whole way home, not saying a word about what we saw. It's been nearly 20 years since this event, and Jake and I are still good friends to this day, but we have never returned to his uncle's cabin since. I don't know if what we saw that night was some kind of paranormal entity or an unknown creature living in the woods, but I don't plan on returning to find out. Thank you for watching. If you have a story that you would like to share on this channel, please send it to my email, unit522stories@outlook.com. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button when notifications turned on. You can further support my channel by visiting the merch store. A link for that is in the description. You'll be hearing from me soon. Until next time, I'm your Uncle Unit. And as always, never forget.